So in 1982, they go on to release their first product, which is the Compass 1101. This was contemporary with the original IBM PC, but it featured an 8086 processor.
Huh, that's really interesting. This here is fellow YouTuber MegaWord TV. He hasn't made a video in a while, but when he did during COVID and the pandemic, he did one on the Grid Compass, and he talked about who Grid Systems were, the designers behind the product, what went into the Grid Compass, and also the kind of people who were buying those laptops in upwards of $10,000 to $15,000 in 1982. I don't have a Compass myself, so we're not going to make a video talking about that today. So if you want, and you have about 9 minutes of time, I strongly recommend you stop this video and go watch his. I'm going to put a link up here in the corner, and if it doesn't show up there, take a look down in the description and then go link there. And then we're going to come back to this. What Grid was doing in 1982 was the exact same thing that everyone else was trying to do, right at the exact same time that the IBM PC came onto the market. And as a result, we all ended up with a myriad of weird products that all ran MS-DOS or used the same microprocessors, but were not compatible with each other. The Compass, unfortunately, falls into that same group there, where yes, it uses the nicer 8086 microprocessor, but it didn't run MS-DOS, and more importantly, it didn't run MS-DOS applications. Grid would later go on to rectify that with their own MS-DOS and IBM PC compatible systems, so while we're not talking about that today, we will be talking about those later compatible machines. The 1980s were not kind at all to the concept of having a computer being portable. So of course we have to start at the beginning of the 1980s, and I'm going to use as the example the Osborne computer. This is a portable computer in that it has 2 disk drives, a video display, and a keyboard. It even has a little slot here to store your extra floppy disks and applications because there's no hard drive inside of it. And it even has a modem inside on this side here so you can dial back into the office. And, well, that's about it for a device that's the size of a sewing machine, because really this is just a desktop CP/M computer that's been repackaged into a case with a display and disk drives. It doesn't even have a battery internally, that is. You could run this thing on battery power, but for the most part, you were supposed to have this thing plugged into the wall at all times. And yes, you could get a battery for this. I think one of the biggest misconceptions with the Osborne is that your battery pack plugs into this connector right here on the front of the machine. It isn't. I can actually prove this to you, and I'll grab it here for you. This is the official battery pack for the Osborne computer. It contains a 12-volt cell, and inside of it comes this little tiny adapter, which is adorable. It's Osborne branded, and it's a cigarette lighter on one side and an IEC power connector on the other. And that's because this thing has a port on the side of it for the cigarette lighter and the charger that you simply plug it in, turn it off because it's complaining. Yes, the batteries are still good. And then you plug this into the system to give you 45 minutes of runtime. I can see why these things are super rare. But this is where it all began. And unfortunately, everyone did this for a while. Historically, the IBM 5150 would come out in late 1982. And Compaq would beat IBM to the market with a portable version in 1983, which, just like the Osborne, was just a repackaged PC in a case with a CRT and disk drives. Not all that great. IBM would follow suit in 1984 with basically the exact same thing. And that then made products like the Morrow Pivot look absolutely state-of-the-art when it also came out in 1984. This is a 100% IBM PC compatible machine. It's significantly smaller, and that's because it uses a liquid crystal display. Actually, to be correct here, this is a Morrow Pivot 2. This is from 1985. Spec-wise, however, it's pretty much the same beyond the LCD display, which uses a hell of a lot less power than the CRT ever would. And even though it does have 2 5¼ inch floppy drives on the side here, which are much smaller, I might add, it does have a full-size keyboard, and because we have these wonderful power savings, the battery is also now considerably smaller and slides into the side of the machine. Unfortunately, the machine itself is still a little bit too large. This will not fit into a briefcase, obviously. In fact, there's hooks on either side of the machine so you can put a shoulder strap on this and carry it with you. There's no handle on it. So by the time 1986 rolls around with my example here, this looks absolutely state-of-the-art. This is the Bondwell Pro 8T. It is still an Intel 8086 device. It is using lower power semiconductors and large-scale integration. It too has an LCD display, but now it's also able to reduce itself further and look a lot more like what we expect of a laptop, including the terrible plastics on it. 3.5-inch floppy, and even for 1986, check this luxury out, we have a hard drive built into this. Wow, that's fantastic. But unfortunately, we're getting really close to what a laptop is supposed to be in 1986. It's still not big enough. Don't believe me? I have right here an example of an executive's briefcase. What is this? Swanson? Oh! Samsonite. I'm going to open that up there so you would take your laptop because you're off your way to a meeting. And this is also, by the way, very heavy. And really, it doesn't want to. There. One moment. There. 1, 2. It's a laptop, but it still just barely fits into your briefcase. Forget about your AC adapter or any other expansions and options you had to bring with you. We're close, and yet not close enough. And the industry was still completely lost on which way it was going to go. You still had some people doing the AC-powered luggables that were high performance and energy consuming. We had people like Morrow who were making these smaller, low power, but kind of still clunky machines. You had Bondwell, which were making smaller but very cheap and very plasticky machines. And then you still had Compaq, where in 1987 you had stuff like this. Now, this says Compaq Portable 386, but the Compaq Portable 3 is the exact same thing. Flip down the keyboard. We have a nice flat gas plasma display, so forget about running this on batteries. And yet, unfortunately, it's still physically larger than the Morrow Pivot. They would not produce their own product that was smaller than this for a little while longer. But in 1987, in comparison, Toshiba would come out with the T1000. Now we were able to have a laptop without a hard drive initially that was battery powered, had a low-cost liquid crystal display, it was IBM PC and MS-DOS compatible, and it was looking a lot more like what we expected a laptop to be, but we were now at the end of the 1980s. And so we come back to Grid Systems with the Compass in 1982. Inside of this small package here, we have a 16-bit 8086 microprocessor, we have 256 kilobytes of RAM, we have 384 kilobytes of non-volatile storage, and yet it all fits inside of this. And the successor that was PC compatible didn't change the form factor at all. It was definitely a spendy product that was expecting people who didn't want to lug too much around. So as I bring out the briefcase again, we open it up. It was very fun what Grid named the successor to the Compass line. A Grid fits into a briefcase with no problems. Hence why they decided to name this the GRiDcase. The GRiDcase became commercially available in 1985, starting with the GRiDcase 2. If you're confused about why it starts with the GRiDcase 2, I am confused equally as well. This reminds me of like taking 3 pigs, painting 1, 2, and 4 on them, and then letting them loose somewhere, and then trying to figure out where pig number 3 was, even though it never really existed. Maybe GRiDcase 1 is like a rename of the Compass, but there was the Compass 1, the Compass 2, there was the 1101, there was a couple of different like submodels. I really don't know, but it starts with the GRiDcase 2. We'll leave it at that, okay? The base amount of RAM that you could get with this is 128 kilobytes. You could expand this internally up to 640 kilobytes because we're now going by IBM's rules. We can expand that further, however, with an internal EMS memory expansion, which could give us 1 megabyte or more of internal RAM. One thing we did have to lose on this, unfortunately, was our solid-state storage. It was really cool that the Compass did have non-volatile memory, and a decent amount of it, but it just wasn't going to work in the GRiDcase. What the Compass was using is some of this stuff right here. This is a development board for it, but in reference, we're talking about this chip in the middle, the white thing. This is an Intel 7110 1 megabit or 128 kilobyte bubble memory module. Bubble memory was very popular in the 1970s. There was a lot of potential for it, but ultimately what happened is that disk technology got faster and cheaper, and RAM also got higher capacity and lower priced as well. By the time that the Compass came out in 1982, bubble memory was pretty much dead, so there was no reason to continue on with that with the GRiDcase. So there was a compromise that was made in two particular edges. The first one is that without bubble memory, we needed some sort of storage. Now, unlike with the Compass, we did have an internal floppy drive. This is a 720 kilobyte, 3.5-inch floppy drive. No weird standards, no weird specifications. It's fantastic. It's instantly double the capacity what you would get on the Compass with its internal storage. Yes, I understand that now you have these external diskettes which you could lose or get dirty or damaged, lost. You get the idea. But now you instantly had double the capacity, which people wanted. But some people still also wanted the immediate bootability of the grids. And that was one of the things that bubble memory supplied, and that's something that a floppy disk can't do. So, also with the GRiDcase here, I'm going to open it up here. We're going to ignore the LCD screen for a moment. And if I take this cover off here, I have some weird plastic sockets. So those sockets there are designed to take mask ROMs or EEPROMs, because instead of having the read-only attributes of bubble memory for like your operating system, seriously, how often do you write to your operating system files? You are more than often just reading to them. You could get your operating system, be it the CCOS Compass Computer Operating System, which was renamed to GridOS, or standard MS-DOS version 2 or version 3, on a group of one or more EEPROMs. And those just simply go into these fancy plastic carriers, and they just snap into the front here. And now, when you turn this machine on, it would instantly boot to a virtual floppy drive mapped over the physical floppy drive. It's really cool, and it means that you can still have MS-DOS running on this here. Your applications can be on this. Or if you want to be really, really special, you can actually set this up so like everything's encrypted, and when you put your encrypted floppy disks in ROM inside the laptop, it would immediately decrypt the floppy. Like, the possibilities are endless. It was a very good compromise, and they did a very good job with it. Now, going back to the display here, well, we no longer have that nice little electroluminescent display, but that was the problem, is that it was little and it was also electroluminescent. It consumed a considerable amount of power, and it was very small. Instead, however, we had a number of options. This one here is the lower cost option and also the lower power option. This is a low contrast liquid crystal display. The high contrast option that was available was, of course, gas plasma, which consumed way more power. And there was also a widescreen version of electroluminescent that was also available for it. But I don't have one, and they also seem to be quite rare. But ultimately, between removing bubble memory, going to a floppy drive, having a low power LCD, and also now being able to use lower power components inside, as there were minor upgrades to large scale integration and semiconductors, we also now used considerably less power. We no longer had the requirement to be plugged into the wall like the Compass was. Yes, like the Compass and like the Osborne actually, you could get an external battery pack that kind of bring it along, but I still think that's kind of cheating and very clunky as hell. So with the GRiDcase, as part of the redesign and as part of the retooling, this is now a battery-powered laptop, and a good one at that. I'm going to turn it around here just to show you. So the battery is living in this pod right here. I can push a button, it ejects it. It's an easy-to-remove battery. It's in a self-contained plastic housing. This thing here will give you a decent amount of time for what it was doing here, and if you were not using the floppy drive in favor of just using everything in ROM, it gave you even more battery life. What's also really cool here is that if you didn't want to run on battery, you could use the AC adapter. The AC adapter looks exactly like the battery. We'll get to that in a moment here. All metal design, of course, well, I guess except for the end here, which is plastic, but when you have terminal contacts, I don't think you want to have metal nearby that anyways. So this is a 60-watt power supply. So this will support the LCD, the electroluminescent, and the gas plasma models, and some of the later models of GRiDcases as well. It's an international power supply, automatically ranging 100 to 240 volts AC with a line frequency between 50 hertz, 60 hertz, and 400 hertz, which was not unheard of on aircraft and other specialty applications. And we now go back to it. The reason it looks exactly like it's the same form factor of the battery is because with the battery removed, it clicks right into the exact same spot, and now you can use it as a luggable if you aren't really required to carry this thing around. Just plug it in and there you go. But how do you charge the battery? Well, okay, so no compromises made there either. So you can always just take the AC adapter out and leave your battery in there. On the back of the GRiDcase, we do have a barrel jack. So that means you can plug an AC adapter or even a car charger into the back of the laptop, and it'll charge the battery both while it's running and while it's sitting there idling and turned off. By sheer chance, the AC adapter that we just talked about that plugs into the back of the laptop, right next to the contacts on the back of it, is another barrel jack. There is a cable that you can go to plug from the GRiDcase into the AC adapter and then use the AC power brick as an external power supply. And now at this point, you can now have the GRiDcase in almost any configuration of AC or DC internal modules or external modules as you wish. You can also charge multiple batteries. You aren't just limited to charging these nice modular and removable batteries inside of the laptop. And the solution that Grid had for that was this guy right here. This is the 2200 docking station. Actually, yes, no, I'm sorry, the base station. This here takes the exact same batteries and they slot in and lock into the front of the unit. The idea behind this is that if you leave it plugged into the GRiDcase charging, it'll take about 12 hours to fully charge that battery. But when you put it into the base station, you can drastically reduce that charge time from 12 hours to 4 hours because it's a fast charger. And it's small, so you can carry it with you if you need to, and it's very easy to simply switch out batteries as you need in order to quickly, continue running with what you are. Unfortunately, there's no standby or hibernation on this laptop, so you will have to save your progress and shut things down before you do that. And also, if you're asking, because the battery is the exact same form factor as the power supply, can you put the power supply into the battery charger? And the answer to that is no. Underneath the battery, you have this slot here. Underneath the AC adapter, you do not have that slot. So if I were to try and stuff that into the power supply, no, that's not how it's going to work, unfortunately. They thought of everything with this. This is really, really, really nicely done. There were no compromises also made to the build quality of the GRiDcase laptops over the Compass. We had seen with the Bondwell and even the Morrow and even the later Compact, plastic, plastic, plastic. Here we are in the future, and well, plastics from the 1980s aren't holding up a whole hell of a lot better 35 to 40 years later. But with Grid, this is a magnesium alloy case, top, bottom, everywhere. Even for the accessories. The AC power brick that I was talking about, that's all metal with a little bit of plastic on this right here. The battery pack, understandably, is plastic, but you really don't want a metal battery pack, And even the charging station here, metal, metal, all of this thing is metal. There is no skimping on the quality. It all feels really nicely painted. It's all nice and heavy. It's all nice and durable. That's one of the biggest misconceptions I find about the GRiDcase, the Compass, and really all of Grid's products, is that these things are military grade, highly durable, highly resistive to the environments, and they can take a beating. I can take this laptop right now, step back, and if I drop it, I will destroy this laptop. The truth is, because this is an executive's computer, it is not designed to take a beating. Because while we open this thing up with its plastic latches, the bezel around the screen here is also made of plastic. The bezel and trim around the keyboard here, is also made of plastic. There is no dust boots on this at all. If you take this cover off here, you will find out that, oh, okay, there's no dust guards here, so if you get water splashed onto it, dirt thrown onto it, it goes inside of the computer, goes onto the motherboard, you're going to have problems. Even when we go onto the back of this computer here, with all of these ports, when I'm working with the lid taken off of this thing and I can see light through the phone jack, that's an indication there's no protection from the elements from this thing here. It's designed to live in a briefcase. It's designed to live in its like canvas carrying bag. It's not designed to be beat around too much. But one of the reasons why Grid made these things what they were is because they're going after Tempest certification, of course, so that way you can get a much more enclosed system, which also then attracts government contracts. We would find Grid laptops being used by the United States Postal Service, the White House, the CIA, the NSA, even NASA would take these laptops to great lengths, putting them even into orbit due to their, not so much their durability, but their ability to still, be rough handled and not cause too many problems. Let's cut away here for a moment so we can take a look at some actually rugged laptops. For those, we're going to have to go 10 to 20 years into the future and look at a line of products from Panasonic. The Toughbook line, of course. This is one of their late 90s models, the CF25. It actually has an MMX Pentium 1 living inside of it at 233 megahertz, and I have 96 megabytes of RAM in it. This runs Windows 98 2nd edition. It has a provision on the side for CD-ROM and a floppy drive. It has a gelatin-supported mechanical hard drive. I have dropped this laptop, and I haven't ruined the screen, and I haven't ruined the hard drive. By the way, it has the most amazing handle on it as well. So I trust that laptop. I still use it with my EEPROM burners. But I upgraded to this laptop here in the middle. This is the Panasonic CF18. This is a better example of one of their tablet era devices because sure, it opens like a laptop, but there's a latch here which lets me rotate it, and boom, now it becomes a tablet. This runs Microsoft Windows XP. This one here uses, again, a mechanical hard drive, but it also now has easier to replace lithium batteries. Gave me about 4 hours of battery life. And it's also water resistant. I have used this thing while it has been pouring rain out and it has not skipped a beat. Also, the LCD screen is now foam supported, so when you drop it or impact it, it's a lot less likely to break. We also have dust boots and covers on all of our connectors on the sides to keep moisture and dust and dirt out. Ultimately, though, I would upgrade to this unit right here, which I believe is the Panasonic CF30. Yes, this is a Core 2 era laptop. Pentium Mobile, Core 2. A little bit larger screen. I use this thing with Windows 7. It's got 8 gigabytes of RAM in it. And for other expandability, we also have on here, well, we're back to solid-state disk techniques. In this case here, a 256 gigabyte SATA disk. Grid had also gone and resolved the major complaint regarding the lack of rear expandability that their portable gave them. On the GRiDcase, you have a hell of a lot more than the Compass ever had. So now, instead of just having an AC input, a modem, and a proprietary and expensive 15-pin serial port made by Canon, which can be one of, I believe, like 3 or 4 different types of serial standards on top of being also Grid's own networking standard, we now have, well, more standardized ports. The modem is still living in here, by the way. So if you want to use Grid's own like 1980s cloud online ordering, software management and remote access software, you still could if you spec'd your machine with a modem. But now you also had a physical 25-pin serial port, a physical 25-pin parallel port, and if you asked for the option, you got yourself an additional 9-pin header here, which gave you CGA out, which I believe also gave you color. So it is full-on CGA that this was now compatible with. We also have this expansion header right here. So you can actually now attach the ISOBUS to this system here. And as a result, there were backpacks that were made that you could have sitting on top of here, and they could store additional peripherals. It could have a SCSI controller. There was a CD-ROM drive attachment that was made for it. If you wanted physical ISA cards, you could have them go into that backpack. There is a later version of the GRiDcase which actually has a platform that it sits underneath, which gives you more expandability, but we're not going to talk about that in this video here. We have lost the GPIB port. This was always a major complaint for people because if you needed to attach a printer, really all you had was the GPIB port. And an example of what those kinds of printers are is the Datasec Tempest printer that I made a video of a little while back. You can go take a look at that if you want. But another thing you use that for is that because the Compass didn't have an internal floppy drive, you had to have an external device. And it wasn't just for floppy drives, it was also for hard drives, and I think even tape drives were also available. And so you would say to yourself, okay, that's fine. Let's say I would go and get myself one of these Hewlett-Packard 9121 dual 3.5-inch floppy drives. It's HPIB, it's still the same thing as GPIB. I can attach that to my Compass and away we go. No, you can't. That's actually one of my complaints I have for the Compass, is that if you want to attach a disk drive to them, up until very, very recently, you had to get GRiD hardware, which was increasingly getting very expensive. But now there's an emulator that lets you emulate floppy and hard drives and I think other peripherals over GPIB. But let's say you had spec'd yourself with a very nice GRiDcase. So in this case here, I'm going to bring out my second. This one here has a built-in 10 megabyte hard drive. It's a JVC drive, I want to point out. Adrian over at Adrian's Digital Basement kind of poked at one of these a couple of years ago. They are terrible drives. Now, we had improved a lot on 3.5-inch drive technology, but normally when we have problems with these drives and it's not of mechanical nature, it's because it's capacitors hanging out somewhere on the drive itself. And a lot of drives are quite sensible in that regard, where the capacitors are visibly and easily accessible on the outside. The JVC drives that GRiD liked to use in these, in fact, put those capacitors inside the sealed hard disk assembly underneath the platter. It is impossible to get to those capacitors and replace them without ruining the drive. So all of these systems with these JVC drives at some point are going to fail, and there's going to be no way to fix them. And also, there is no way to substitute them. I don't believe there's any sort of emulators like we had with the GPIB connection on the back of the Compass. But also with this configuration, you don't have a floppy drive at all. So what GRiD had done is that they had provided with you external disk options. In this case here, your choice of 3.5-inch or 5.25-inch, because remember, we're talking about the PC here. Now you can easily load in your applications without having to use your modem to dial into your GRiD server to then download your software, or to contact GRiD directly, purchase your software, and digitally download your software onto your hard drive. You can now just carry along with you a floppy drive, and that was a hell of a lot easier. Oh, one more thing also, while we're still talking about the expansion connector on the back of the GRiDcase here. Yeah, so remember this battery charging station right here? GRiD was, again, very forward thinking. Not only can you attach peripheral expansions that go on top of here, oh yeah, external boxes like this, they support them too, because GRiD was very smart like that. The exact same expansion port here is also available here. Now, why the hell is it available on a battery charger? Is there magic logic going inside of this battery charger? There is not. You can get external floppy drives and hard drives, and I believe even tape drives that have this expansion connector, and they're all basically the same form factor as this box right here. All right, so that means now you're going to have cables that are going to loop out to each device as you go through. Not so fast. Again, GRiD is absolute masters at the art of making very nice hardware. So, as a result, if you look at these connectors, there's tabs. I can tilt these connectors facing up, facing down. Congratulations, all of these devices are stackable. You don't require more than one cable that goes from your stack of chargers and drives over to your laptop. Oh yeah, one more thing before we move away from the expansion capabilities of the GRiDcase. You may have also noticed that on the back of the unit we have a DIN plug that's hiding over here. Is that power? Is it networking? Or is it something like that? No, it's exactly what you think it is. It's so you can attach an external keypad or any other standard type of XT or AT style keyboard into the unit. This particular one here says it's from the Grid 1500 series. It is, however, still just a numeric keypad. And it's also the first time I'm going to say that Grid phoned something in. It doesn't feel like their workmanship. It's got the wedge shape to it that we would typically expect from like a normal keyboard. It's not like square or anything. It's all plastic, by the way. And the other thing is also the key switches on here. Normally I don't complain about this, but on these here, it's Keytronics foam and foil. Grid was a lot better than that, and yet they decided to go with that. That was a decision to do. What that means is that when you find these keypads now, if you don't drop them, good thing this is a metal case, none of the keys work, and that's because foam and foil pads like to basically turn to dust after almost 40 years of existing. TechSelect does sell a kit so you can buy pads and repair them. I've also made a video, however, as well that tells you how to find the materials you need to make your own foam and foil pads, how to punch them out, and then put them into whatever keyboard or other device that you're working with. Now, we've been down this road once before with Apricot. You can make a machine that has all sorts of expandability. You can make a machine that runs MS-DOS. You can even make yourself a machine that has the best engineering that was absolutely possible at the time. Ultimately, however, if your customers aren't interested or not liking in the improvements you've made to a product, they just won't continue to buy it, even if you have your government contracts. So the real question is, what did people think of Grid, especially with the GRiDcase? For that one there, we can actually take a look at Popular Science in September of 1985, because they did do a review on a number of briefcase-sized computers. It's also fun because Popular Science at this time was still more or less completely overloaded with advertisements for cigarettes or, advertisements for fancy station wagons that we've never seen or heard of before. Or, we could just go back to product reviews, which actually aren't all that bad at all. In this case here, we're going to be talking about everything from the Data General 1, which I believe Cathode Ray Dude absolutely loves these things. He did a little demonstration of this at ICF a little while ago. These things have terrible screens, but they're liquid crystal displays, so they don't consume a whole hell of a lot of power. As a result, they become a lot more practical to use on battery. Grid, on the other hand, could get you with a combination of your choice. Liquid crystal displays, which used about 1 watt of power. You could use an electroluminescent display, which was much better readability, but now consumed about 15 to 20 watts. Or you could go with high contrast gas plasma displays, which consumed upwards of 30 watts. In the configuration that they had here, it looks like they reviewed it with a gas plasma display, and they stated that they got on battery 1 hour of runtime. I find that very difficult to believe. So going back to our Grid battery pack here, this is nickel cadmium. This here was going to get them 1 hour of battery runtime. You use the original batteries in one of these and try and test it on a GRiDcase, you're not going to get an hour. You're going to get about 15 minutes. Actually, no, on your original batteries, you're not going to get any life out of them at all. If you rebuild this pack with nickel cadmiums, modern chemistry nickel cadmiums, I've seen it with my own eyes, you get 15 minutes on a gas plasma display. That makes the battery an uninterruptible power supply. This gives you the ability, if the power drops out or your cord gets yanked, to save your whatever you're doing and shut the computer down safely. It's a hell of a lot better, like I've mentioned before, if you have the LCD screen, but then you have terrible readability under certain angles, and you also don't have backlighting yet that's available. But you do still get that 2.5 to even 4 hours of runtime, depending on your other configurations, such as floppy drives, external peripherals, and hard drives. The size is also mentioned here between the Compass 1100, which is basically what the Compass was, and the GRiDcase 3, which is what they were reviewing at the time in '85. 11.5 by 15 by 2 inches for the Compass, and it's exactly the same for the GRiDcase 3, except it's now 2.25 inches. Weight, probably because of the gas plasma display, goes from 10 pounds for the Compass to 12 pounds for the GRiDcase, so it's a heavy beast, but remember, it's all metal. And also they pointed out here that while the Compass 1100 cost $4,250. The second most expensive laptop they reviewed, the GRiDcase 3, comes in at $4,350, the most expensive laptop they reviewed. This is also a drastic improvement in price, considering that the Compass would start at $4,000 and go upwards of $15,000, depending on the hardware configuration that you were getting in 1982. So that's a huge cut on cost in only 3 years. Now, in comparison, we can actually take a look here, and we see that there's my Moro Pivot 2. And if we look at this here, the Pivot 2, in comparison, was $2,995, but its dimensions are 13 by 6 by 9.5 inches, and it's even heavier than the GRiDcase 3 at 13 pounds. But it does have an LCD with electroluminescent backlighting, and also has a battery which allows for, again, 3.5 hours of runtime. And the last thing I'm going to talk about with the GRiDcase is, again, software. We touched on this once before. We're going to go over it again. The drawback about talking about 100% IBM PC compatible systems is that, well, it runs everything. It runs Lotus 123. It runs Microsoft Word. It'll do Flight Simulator. Because it's a Grid laptop, there's a fancy little program that simulates the turret controls from some movie that I have honestly never seen, so shoot me as you will about that one there. Grid obviously supplied a fair volume of software, as well as all documentation, not just for MS-DOS, but for their other productivity software available both in Grid OS or for MS-DOS. This software here comes with all the material you need for MS-DOS version 3.3, but also what they like to call Grid Master and Grid Slave, or the Grid server system here as well, because Grid had not completely let go of the idea that you would be able to dial into a remote system, grab files to put onto your machine, run them, probably off the floppy drive at that point there, and then send files back to a central file server. Again, this is like scary close to how the cloud works today. And this is the early 1980s. It's wild what Grid was doing, and nobody touched on it until the 2000s. ROM, what do you do with it? How do you upgrade it? How do you add it on? Well, in all of the Grid cases, what you have is internal ROMs that you can't physically remove easily, but for the rest of them, you actually have these little tiny plastic covers that can come off. There's supposed to be one hiding underneath over here, and with the system off, I can take my ROM, and because it's in this carrier, the pins are already folded over, and this just snaps into place, and I can now power up the machine, and away we go with whatever application I've now added into it. Really cool stuff. Like, this is peak design, ultimate expandability, and while it was over $4,000, it's kind of worth it if you needed this kind of flexibility, but also a laptop that you could take to the club with the boys, and instead of showing off your various build qualities of your beautiful business cards, you can say, yeah, I have the new GRiDcase 3, gas plasma display, ROM operating system. This is the kind of thing I would not be surprised to have seen in the film American Psycho if they had considered putting a Grid laptop in there just as a luxury brag point. So, in closing, what is the GRiDcase? The GRiDcase 2 and 3 and the various Plus models that were available are absolutely wonderful successors to the Grid Compass. They got rid of the various features and functionality that wasn't really wanted or was more or less obsolete, such as the non-volatile bubble memory, and replaced it with an IBM PC compatible system which made no compromises. And as a result, even with all of the quality, feel, look, and the size, it cost less than a Compass as well. So do I recommend you go out right now and get one? Well, there's a couple of exceptions, and we've talked about a couple of them here already. If you find one for like $100, sure, go for it, no problem. But if someone wants like $200 or more, you need to start thinking about what's coming with that computer. Is it just the laptop? Does it come with any external drives? Does it come with an internal hard drive? Because remember, like I said, those hard drives are failing, and if you have a hard drive, you don't have an internal floppy drive, so you're kind of screwed there. What kind of display technology does it have? So is it gas plasma, or is it the more conventional LCD? Does it come with its power supply? Does it come with a battery pack? Or does it come with something else like a carrying bag or something like that? Documentation, ROM software, it all adds into it. So when I see someone trying to sell one of these things for like $1,000 or more, you're dreaming, dude. These are people here who are hunting down those desperate prop items because this thing saw like, what, 15 seconds of time in a movie, Aliens? Like a director's cut. It wasn't even in the regular movie. It was just kind of added in there for like a brief scene where you had something painted onto the display. Why are you paying that kind of money for a movie prop that's not really a movie prop? You get my point. For a portable computer, they're actually really nice. Because we have now gotten the lithium conversion for them, they actually have good runtime. And I've actually used one of these things out in the real world. When I went to VCF Midwest in 2025, I brought this thing with its lithium battery pack because I trusted it not to catch on fire, and tried using it in a plane. Needless to say, business class and economy class is not the same as first class, and while I have seen people use the grid compass at 32,000 feet, it's very cramped to be using a GRiDcase in your seat at 32,000 feet. Do I believe these things to be super ultra rugged portables? No. Do I consider them to be bomb-proof or bulletproof? Absolutely not. Do I consider them to be well built? Well, again, like I said, the metal case is kind of nice, but if you drop it or rough handle it too much, it will break. And there's other problems for that, and I'd also like to demonstrate it with my parts unit here, because my parts unit is somewhat special. It does have a floppy drive inside of it. It also has a connection for an external floppy drive. Every GRiDcase also has inside of it a battery. It's used for the real-time clock, but also is required by the system to turn it on. What kind of battery do you think it uses? Yeah, I'm sorry, you folks out there. These things use these little 3.6 volt lithium cells. The Apple people know these things quite well. Thankfully, I haven't found it to be the red Mac cells that like to leak and catastrophically fail. Unfortunately, this laptop here is the only one I have which has leaked and has caused some damage. Has it ruined the motherboard? No, but it did cause damage, quite aggressive damage to the magnesium alloy case, and I also lost components on the battery carrier board here, hence why this is a parts unit. But this also gives me then an example to show to you that how easy is one of these to service. Like if you have to take it apart to do the battery, or you have to replace the capacitors inside of the DC-DC module, which is really nice. I'd like to point out there is no capacitors on the motherboard to deal with, just the one module there. How hard is it? 2 screws, take off the lid, take off this back lid here. The screen, once that's off, comes off like that. How about you get into here? Remember how I was saying this is not dustproof or waterproof? Let me show you. There's no screws that hold this trim on here. You use a screwdriver or your fingers, and I swear to God, this is how it is. There. You should not have to do that in a durable piece of equipment. And if I can persuade it, there we go. It's plastic. It's all plastic. There's no seals, there's no dust boots, there's no nothing. But now you can see the internal ROMs. If you have those, that's fantastic. The external ROMs, getting these little tiny plastic carriers can be really annoying, but if they're included in the deal, go for it. And the keyboard's held in with like 5 screws or 6 screws. Not all that bad. So ultimately, I would say amongst all of the other laptops that I've owned from the 1980s, the GRiDcase is definitely one that, while it's not as cool as the Compass with its bubble memory, is a solid performer. And it'll do absolutely everything you expect from a PC-compatible laptop, and it's small, and it looks a lot more modern than you would expect from a laptop whose designs started in 1982. And did they sell well? Well, just take a look at the pile that's been slowly accumulating around me here during the video. I actually have a total of 7 GRiDcase laptops. They're not all that expensive if you look around. This one here even, this GRiDcase 3, this thing only cost me $50, again, because it had a bad battery and they were unable to test it. There are still good bargains to be found, and if you find one for not too much money, and it has the right options, I strongly recommend it. Now, do I believe that the GRiDcase is the ultimate 80s laptop? No, but it comes pretty damn close. You know why I say that? Because before the end of the decade, Grid would go and produce a 286 and a 386 model in the same form factor, in the same magnesium alloy case, and they would make no compromises. That's wild. Anyways, I'm just gonna go here and unplug the battery on it, and maybe just kind of fold it up on me here, and I'm gonna go off and do some work in the yard. I hope you enjoyed this video on the GRiDcase series of laptops, and until next time, have a good one.